One of the more frequent messages I bring to this pulpit is the importance of engaging in dialogue with each other on issues that are important to you, especially on those where we might differ in our feelings or understandings. This particularly applies to things commonly understood as religious beliefs. To me, this is an essential practice and is called for by the common underpinnings of our UU faith. We do not teach creeds. We do not prescribe belief. Instead, we ask that each person engage in a free and responsible search for truth and understanding and meaning. This indeed is a tall order. Not being told what to believe in is pretty easy to accept, and allowing us to exercise our personal insight and judgment as we look for answers, well, that seems okay too. But expecting us to actively search for truth and meaning is a lie. Indeed, it must happen this way. Only we are capable of discerning and understanding what really matters to us, what is important in our lives. No one else can tell you this. Your experiences, your intuition, your gut response to human situations, these are what tend to steer us. And we are the only experts on our own experience. At least we're experts if we're honest with ourselves. And not only do we have to figure out what has meaning for us, we are also charged with figuring out what is truth, what is true. This is not an easy one. I would hazard a guess that truth is one of those things we probably all don't agree on here in this room. Let me ask you now, and I won't make you answer. Can individual people hold different truths? Is truth in good part relative and subjective? Some of us will favor our sense of openness and tolerance and claim that yes, truth is often relative and that your truth and mine are likely to be different. Others will rely more on intellect and reason and say, nonsense. Truth is truth, an absolute and verifiable condition of something factual. People may hold different opinions and beliefs and attitudes, but truth is objective. This is just one of the many orientations to life that we see differently among ourselves. I won't try to answer this right now, in part because I don't think I can, but also because there's wisdom and a potentially honorable point of view in each of these answers. It does, however, point to how easy it can be to get caught in the weeds with philosophical questions. Clearly, if we want to discuss truth, we need to first come together and come to at least a tentative agreement about what we are talking about. Misunderstandings at the biggest levels are frequently the source of broken dialogue. In this country, we face an election this week, midterms, and both sides are vociferously claiming that the other represents a radical and unacceptable assault on the essential attributes of democracy. If you vote for them, democracy will be irrevocably broken. What neither side says is what they understand to be the essential attributes of democracy. And when I say that, I think maybe I'm being a little unfair to the left, because at least we know that they claim that voting has something to do with it. Maybe my favorite example of different expectations is the young couple waiting for each other to declare that they are in love with one another without ever asking or volunteering what they think love entails. It's sort of, if you say the words, we will figure the rest out later. But if you don't say the words, I'm not sure there will be a later. I say that it's important to share and discuss your beliefs, especially for your youth, because by sharing and discussing things, we figure out what we do think. We find ways to express our ideas, and we expose them to the consideration of others. Common wisdom lists religious belief as something not to be brought up in public company, lest it may render the company impolite. But we are not common people, and we should feel compelled to share these thoughts. Talking about belief is not easy. You might fear being dismissed or even humiliated in response, or you might feel that if you express your thought, they could be taken as a challenge by others who don't share the same ideas. This is one reason why we demand respect and tolerance for the ideas and expressions of others. The only way to discuss beliefs openly and honesty is within a container of safety and trust. The things we might discuss are notions like, is there a God or gods or a force of some kind that is at work in our universe? And if so, how do you understand it? And how does it do what it does? Or what happens to me when I die? Is there an afterlife? Do I transition to another essence? Is there something like reincarnation? A related but not necessarily religious question is, are there ghosts and spirits in our midst and maybe in our castle? Last week, during the time of Samhain, Halloween, and Dia de los Muertos, the veil between our world and another, was it really thinner than at other times? Belief questions are hard for many of us to answer because we hold them as private thoughts. But that tends to mean we hold them as static, rigid, and inflexible thoughts as well. Because in the privacy of our own minds, they are not often subject to examination or re-examination. When we discuss them with others, we must frame them, describe them, and really put them out there. And others will rightfully react. Hopefully they act respectfully and without insult or harm, but at minimum they should respond in kind by describing their own thoughts on the same questions, by reframing the questions you thought you were discussing. By reframing the questions you thought you were discussing. Seeing how other people evaluate similar information can be engaging. It can challenge you, stimulate you, and it's a mechanism for growth. Another set of eyes often see the same thing in a very different way. So far, I'm talking about us, mostly, about you-yous and the importance of our engaging in deep discussion on compelling matters. My guess is that most of you would be willing to talk about your belief in the presence of others from this church, and that you would expect that if you did, you would be treated with respect and taken seriously as you did so. This is, hopefully, a safe place. But how about talking to others, neighbors, co-workers, acquaintances, and worst of all, relatives? This is where the injunction against talking about religion tends to apply. Would you feel comfortable addressing belief after Thanksgiving dinner with whoever is assembled there? For some, it's no big deal, but for others, it would be a call to battle. Many of us grew up in different religious traditions and have family and friends that are deeply involved in communities of belief that are quite different from what we share here. If you broach the topic, some of you would have to face anger, rejection, or worst of all, experience the grief of a loved one who is sobbing because they know that you will not join them in paradise because you're damned to hell forever because you did not accept Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. In my ears, this sounds odd, but I know that it happens in households across America. Beliefs are tough. And so I guess I will get around to discussing today's topic, which was commissioned by Emily Newsom. The topic is street epistemology. It sounds flashy, but like most things of worth, it is as simple as it is complex. Epistemology, we might know, is the philosophical term for examining the basis of knowledge, how we know what we know. And the term street here is meant to convey a set of methods that anyone can pursue, not just people trained in philosophy or psychology or some sort of therapy. The term was coined about 10 years ago by Peter Boghossian in a book titled A Manual for Creating Atheists. And as you might guess from the title, Dr. Boghossian has a point of view. He frequently describes belief in God as a virus that has infected a large share of our culture and is attempting to devise a process that can challenge and disrupt the predominance of belief. As an aside, Dr. Boghossian was sort of a normal kid and then became a born-again Christian and then became an angry and aggressive doubter. So that's his background. And as so many have documented, belief in God is a difficult thing to argue. Challenging it factually, debating, pointing out inconsistency in Scripture, all of these have been losing propositions. The church has a whole discipline called apologetics that has spent over 1,000 years honing arguments in the other direction. Arguing with people about the existence of God threatens them. It threatens their entire religious community and maybe the makeup of their whole life. Indeed, many attempts to argue about the existence of God have just led to a firmer resolve in the original beliefs, a doubling down on belief. The biggest barrier, however, is that rational argument and debate hold little effect because most belief is anchored in something people know as faith. God is ineffable and cannot be seen or heard or even known to mortal man. How could you expect to disprove the existence of something that no one can see anyway? It is faith that is the ultimate commitment to God and the most difficult to disrupt. Boghossian's real contribution was recognizing that most belief is based on what he considers faulty epistemology, unsustainable reasons for knowing that God exists. And while attacking God through ridicule and debate has not proven to be a successful strategy, it might be more productive to plant seeds of doubt in the believer, not by challenging their belief, but by challenging its underpinnings. In this case, that usually ends up being a process of questioning the validity of faith itself. Street epistemology is a loosely defined process for engaging people with strong beliefs, especially with strong beliefs in things that cannot be proved. Others have followed Boghossian and expanded and refined the practices, and much of what I know, I learned not from his book, but through the work of Anthony Magnabosco, an active proponent and practitioner of street epistemology. But the premises remain similar, and there seems to be a rule that you have to have a long last name to be a street epistemologist. Boghossian, Magnabosco, or whatever. The process is to engage a person by having them define something they believe in strongly. For Boghossian, this was usually a belief in God, but it could work as well on climate change denial, anti-vaxxers, devout atheists, or people holding any strong belief. Importantly, they are the ones that name and describe what it is they believe in. You don't tell them what God they should or shouldn't believe in. They tell you what God they do believe in. The street epistemology practitioner, who I will call the interviewer here, participates in the conversation to clarify and to echo back the words of the subject, and eventually to engage in questions partly modeled after Socratic dialogues. The idea is never to debate beliefs or facts, but to inquire about the subject's understanding of their own belief. How strongly do they know that what they believe is true? Do they consider that position flexible or fixed? Why do they believe this? And importantly, how do they know that what they believe is true? And often the interview starts with the questions about truth itself. The discussion is directed to move away from the what and why and to focus on the how. Instead of attacking a belief, the interviewer raises questions about the foundations on which it is held, the methods the subject relied on to justify the belief. Discussions of the existence of God usually become a discussion about faith. But along the way, we might learn that the subject was brought into their belief system by their parents, that it's important to them, and that it has served them well in many ways. And these are important to knowing reasons why the subject themselves is interested and cares about the topic. But they are not usually explanations of how the subject knows that their belief is correct, or the methods they use to sustain it. With God belief, the discussion most frequently ends up supporting belief through faith, as I have said, as an act of faith. Now, logically, faith can be problematic because it's a notion that is self-contained and circular, and it's not usually subject to empirical verification or proof. Indeed, that's one reason it works so well. The interviewer will have the subject describe their faith posture, how it works, and how they think it shows them that God exists. Sometimes the subject struggles, and aspects of justification by faith might arise that are shaky and lead them to ask questions. Usually that's not so much the case. And then the interviewer might make suggestions like, from what they hear, faith sounds a little relativistic. And why couldn't it be used as readily to support the existence of Allah, or the Hindu gods, the flying spaghetti monster, or anything else? The point, though, is not to win in these discussions, but to sow seeds of possible skepticism, to raise doubts. Anthony Magnabosco phrased this as placing a pebble in their shoe so that they will always carry lingering questions about the reliability of their beliefs. And they potentially will reflect more on this discussion in the future. Indeed, the discussions should never be contentious. They should never be arguments. And if well done, they should have been enjoyable to the subject as well as the interviewer. Like all good discussions, they make sure they are always talking about the same thing. They define terms as carefully as they can, and they check in often by repeating and rephrasing what they think they just heard the other say. These are important techniques in discussing anything. It's much easier to communicate when you're talking about the same thing. All answers are treated with respect, and questions are used for clarifying or understanding and are not directly thrown out as evaluations or judgments. And while this is initially motivated and often framed as a way to disabuse people of illusory God notions, street epistemology shows many insights and carries a lot of wisdom otherwise. As a process, it is performed objectively, with its only true commitment being the truth. Because Bogassian knows that there is no God and the God virus is a problem, he sees the tool as being a process for creating atheists. The stated goal of his book, in fact, is, and I quote, to create a generation of street epistemologists who will actively go any place the faithful reside and help them abandon their faith and embrace reason. What I wish to see, and it probably exists, I just haven't found it yet because I haven't looked that hard, is a street epistemology interview with a devout atheist, maybe even Peter Boghossian, on their justifications for denying the presence of any supernatural force in our universe. Because in my mind, the evidence for no God is that there is no evidence of God. I wouldn't call this a high standard of proof. But listen carefully to what the process does accomplish. It stays out of the weeds by refusing to engage in arguments over an unending litany of poorly known and imperfectly shared facts. And it steers away from the my expert versus your expert types of comparison. How often do we hear things where people just keep bringing up, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Global warming, happening, not happening. Everybody's got narratives and stories and counter stories and measures. And it's really easy to argue whether you know what you're talking about or not. Street epistemology considers, but does not dwell on the reasons the subject holds the position. These are the areas where most conversations about belief become unproductive and sometimes ugly. Instead, it opens an expansive discussion on the ways of knowing and the basis of assessing truthfulness of personal claims. Most subjects do not leave the interview converted, but the hope is that their thinking is at least tweaked towards potential transformation. Anything that raises the quality of discourse, allows for better sharing, and that help us get past reasons and attend to the essence of our beliefs has to be a good thing. The teasing premise that we could work is that we could work up a version to address our political divides. This is an attractive idea. If nothing else, it would be useful to get underneath the surface beliefs and the immediate rationales for political opinions and help to unearth the deep narratives we hold and the ways we have come to hold them. We will have to see. Until then, Emily, I hope I did you a little justice here. I tried. So be it. Namaste. Ashe. We sing. Hymn number 124, Be That Guide.